Hi, my name is Jane, and this is Books I've Read Recently, otherwise known as books that need to go back to the library and also some other books that I've read. Before we get started, as a general note, I am the kind of person who doesn't want to know anything about a book that I'm about to read, but I am not yet practiced in being able to extend that courtesy to you. So if there's going to be anything that's going to totally spoil a book for you, I'm going to leave a timestamp in the description box below. But if you're not interested in reading these books or you have a high threshold for spoilers, then go ahead and watch with abandon. Let's start off with books that went back to the library because I didn't know I was doing this. First up, we have Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. This is her book on instructions on writing and life, but the emphasis would be on the life. If you're looking for a style manual, writing exercises, or just an outline of things to do if you want to be a writer, this is not the book for you. You should look up elements of style, anything that says like 100 writing exercises for young adults, new writers, people. This is not the book for you because she would like to tell you about her life. Her main advice for writing is to write about your childhood. She assumes that your childhood was very difficult, that it was potentially abusive, and she really wants you to dig down deep and tell the world about what you've experienced. If this was not you, you might feel a little bit left out, honestly, because she's so adamant that you've had a difficult childhood. If you're looking for a book from a writer about her life and her career as a writer and some stories about her childhood while she tells you to write about your childhood, then this is a good book for you. This would be interesting, it would be a light read, and it's fairly humorous. Next up, we have The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This is a collection of short stories. They're about 20 pages long, and it was not very creepy. And he was not yet the Sherlock we've all come to know and love. If you're in it for the Benedict Cumberbatch BBC version of Sherlock Holmes, this is not the collection of Sherlock Holmes for you. We don't see any of his normal lines. We aren't yet at the famous line of "come at once, if inconvenient, come anyway." He was only in an opium den once. And he wasn't even there for recreation, he was there for work. So, I think that you should skip ahead if you're looking for any of that stuff. But if you have a low threshold for creepiness, this might be a good place to start because it was relatively uncreepy. Okay, now we can move on to books that I actually have in my possession, starting with self-help books. Not because I'm going through a crisis, but because I'm doing a secret project that apparently required a lot of self-help this month. First up, we have Things Are What You Make of Them. This is by Adam J. Kurtz, and this is a postcard style book. That I found to be pretty forgettable. If you're a creative and you're struggling with the fact that you're working for yourself, this is not a good book for you. If you've read any books for people who work for themselves, you've probably already heard everything that he has to say on the subject. If you are not a creative, if you don't work in a creative field, if you don't define yourself as a writer or an artist or something like that, this book does not go out of its way to include you. And generally, it has a pretty extroverted energy. So if you're really comfortable being out in public doing your work, then this probably has good advice for you. If you're struggling with the fact that you're doing this work and you feel left out from regular everyday society, this is not going to help you with that. So the foreword to this book solidifies my feelings about it. Grace Bonney, founder of Design Sponge, has written it, and she writes about Adam. And she means for it to be a compliment, but for me, it's the main red flag in this book, because she writes about how Adam is so vulnerable and willing to put himself out there and things like that. And to me, that says that you're the kind of person who is okay with being vulnerable at the drop of a hat. And I am not. If you are also not, then this advice is not going to be super relatable to you, because it's going to take you more time to become confident and available to your creative process. And the vulnerability thing is a hook to make you feel better and feel like this guy is just like you. But in my experience, most of these people who are like, oh yes, I fell on hard times, and then you find out that it's fine because they graduated summa cum laude from Harvard and they now run a multi-million-dollar business. That's the kind of vulnerability that I'm getting from Adam. So it did not resonate with me. However, if you have done that and you feel very comfortable and confident and vulnerable just constantly in your life, then cool. This is the book for you. Next up, we have The Little Book of Healthy Beauty by Pina Lojudice. My thoughts on this book can be summed up in one sentence. Please do not get a colonic because she tells you to. Pina Lojudice is a naturopath, and this book starts off really strong. You should sleep, you should eat your vegetables, you should drink your water, get some exercise, all that kind of stuff. And that's great. Everybody should do that. But the second half of the book is dedicated to colonics, acupuncture, and selling supplements from her clinic. If you are somebody who goes to a naturopath already, and you know, and you're initiated, and everything's great, and your life has been changed, then fine. Maybe your naturopath is going to suggest this book to you and tell you to go get a colonic. In that case, go ahead. But if you don't have the money to do that, if you weren't planning to do that, if you're, not part of the naturopath bandwagon that seems to be happening, then don't go out of your way to follow this advice just because she says to do it. Just focus on drinking your water and sleeping and eating your vegetables and getting your exercise. Finally, in this odyssey of self-help, we have Outer Order Inner Calm by Gretchen Rubin. This is a book for people who enjoyed the life-changing magic of tidying up, but really wish that it had gone faster. This is also a book for Gretchen Rubin's fans because it's in her voice. If that's what you're looking for, then that's great. If you want more density, though, maybe don't worry about this one. Okay. Now that we've helped ourselves within an inch of our lives, let's move on to real books featuring plot and characters. Okay, first up, we have the book that I am most excited to talk about, that I have the most things to say, and that is Black Leopard, Red Wolf. This is a 620-page monster. It is dark, it is dense, it is disorienting. Neil Gaiman read it, and he liked it, and he wrote a little blurb on the back. So if you like Neil Gaiman and his taste in books, maybe this is for you. The actual description of this book is, it is a modernized version of African mythology set in a fictionalized Africa around a sexually fluid man with heightened abilities. His name is Tracker, and he's looking for a kid. And I think that's all they tell you in the flap. Yeah. With this, I didn't know that it was a LGBT book. It's not marketed in that way as far as I've seen. So I feel bad telling you that, but the way that he treats this material I think is really important, and so I want to talk about it. With that being said, please excuse any vernacular that is not PC or that we're not using, because I'm trying my best here, but I'm also not part of this community. So I don't know proper terminology all the time, but I'm trying, I promise. Okay. Now, if you would like to read this book the way that I did, go ahead and skip to the next book, because I didn't know anything about this going in, and I think that it helped my reading experience, to be honest. After having read this book, the criticism of it that I've read in various reviews can be summed up as, this is too much. It's too much in two ways for people. The first way people think that it's too much are there are too many triggers, there's too many difficult topics, and they're not handled well. The second criticism would be it's hard to read with no payoff, that it's too difficult to read, there's too much energy put into reading it, and then there isn't a payoff at the end. So, yes, there are triggers. There are a lot of them. The shortlist would include things like rape, incest, body mutilation, generally creepy stuff, gore, and a very detailed scene that would definitely set off somebody who doesn't like holes or clusters of holes. It was gross. Now, I didn't know anything going into this book. I wasn't aware of the adult content of this book, so I feel like I just went with it. I just rode the wave of atrocities against humanity, and I was fine. The other part of it is, if you're used to mythology, if you're used to Greek or Norse mythology, then you're probably a little bit desensitized to this sort of content, because it's the same kind of stuff that shows up all the time in those stories, in the traditional stories, not in the Disney-fied version. Marlon James, as a writer, seems to have thought about the fact that he's writing this mythology in 2019. So he's kept all the gross stuff in, all the traditional mythology stuff that could be considered creepy, triggering, gross, all of that. But he's balanced it with modern messaging about gender roles, sexuality, the way society runs as a whole, and how we should act as people. And because of that, I'm less inclined to hold it against him to keep the actual mythology stuff in. I would consider him to be a feminist. He discusses not blaming rape victims. He also discusses the ingrained hatred that some people carry around against women. He discusses messaging about what makes a man and whether or not being manly is something that is necessary, if it's something that they should even be considering, if it should be the traditional form of masculinity that they're used to. Another big part of this book is the LGBT GRSM content. He does not label it. He doesn't discuss it in a way that requires labeling. And these characters are more dynamic than their sexual preference. They have more to offer. In fact, it's so unnecessary to the story that it's not in any of the descriptions that I've read of this book. And I like that. I think that that's important, because these people are just living their lives, and they're not defined by who they're sleeping with in the way that sometimes gets defined in young adult novels. And those young adult novels are geared towards teenagers who are grappling with these things, with this coming out, or what is their sexuality, or what are they going to do with their lives. They have to deal with it in such a big way that seeing an adult book deal with sexuality in such a benign way is cool. It's nice. There are ramifications. There are ways that the characters have to deal with the fact that they are gay or bisexual or just fluid. I think most of them would consider themselves just fluid. They haven't thought about what they are. and they don't really care to. But they do have to deal with places that are going to be less hospitable to them. What will other people think if they find out? But it never becomes such a burden that they aren't themselves, basically. Because he has written this book in such a way that he deals with the mythology, he keeps it true to what I would assume is the traditional stories, but he also has thought about a modern message to add to his book. I am not bothered by this book, and I think that if you have reservations about reading this book because you've heard about some of the content, I wouldn't be too worried about it. If you're okay with, a little bit of gore, a little bit of crimes against humanity. The second criticism is that this book is very difficult to read. And that it's difficult to read without any payoff at the end. So, if you've read The Song of Achilles and you wanted more, if you wanted more of the original story, if you wanted more density, if you wanted more depth of character, things like that, then this would be more. This would be more of your traditional mythology. If, however, you've read the Odyssey and it made you think, this needs to be less, this needs to be taken down 10 or 15%, then this is going to be a difficult read for you. However, I think it's going to be a difficult read for basically anybody. This is not going to be a beach read. It's not going to be something that you kick back at the end of a long day and relax with. You're going to have to think about this book, and you're going to have to deal with the themes that he's brought up. The style of this book is also something to consider. If you're okay with books that are non-linear, then this would be okay. If you've read books from the point of view of somebody who is high, drunk, or otherwise incapacitated, and that was okay for you, then this would be okay. It has kind of similar tone in some parts. If you watched the last scene of Inception and you were fine with it, you thought that it was a cool thought experiment, then this would be a fun book for you. If me bringing up the last scene of Inception raised your blood pressure a little bit, this might not be a very good or enjoyable book for you. Some of the themes are themes we've seen in pretty modern fantasy type novels. You have Game of Thrones, you have the gore, and you also have highly motivated, cutthroat people. Then you have something like Handmaid's Tale, and this would be fertility issues, fanaticism, and creating a dystopian society because of fear. That was one of the little storylines that we dealt with. This is a very fantasy novel, and it has some of your classic Tolkien fantasy stuff. You have an adventure, you have walking, you have maps, humanoid creatures, language sprinkles throughout. And a lot of this stuff is reimagined, it's new, it's fresh, it doesn't feel like you're reading a ripoff of Tolkien, but you can still track the flow, I guess. All that being said, I think this would be a good book for a lot of people, so long as you know what you're getting into style-wise, and the content of this book is not going to completely turn you off and ruin the experience. Okay, now for some spoiler discussions. This book is going to be a trilogy. And it's going to be a trilogy in that we're going to hear the same story from different people. And I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. I don't know how you're going to convince me that this is not the correct telling. And I don't know how we're going to get the different storylines, because, what would you call it? Well, this is supposed to be the leopard and the wolf. So the leopard dies, right? So we can't have the leopard, but that's fine because he's included here. So who are we going to talk to? We can't talk to the boyfriend because he's dead. We have to talk to, the witch. And it's it's kind of interesting, right? Because Tracker hates it. That's his ingrained hatred of women that his boyfriend brings up. And so it would be interesting to see that, but I just, how are you going to convince me that this is not correct? I don't know if I'm going to read it. I can't say that I enjoyed the style enough to want to go through it again. Certainly not to go through it twice, as of right now. And yet, like, I kind of want to know. Next up, we have 3 Junes by Julia Glass. This is also a gay-centric book, which I didn't know about, again. This has multiple storylines, but one of the main themes is aging parents, parents dying, dealing with death. We also deal with the AIDS crisis of the 90s. And I think that this would be an okay read for most people. Despite the fact that we're dealing with a lot of these difficult subjects, I think that it would be okay for most people. I don't think that it is too graphic or hard, not in the way that Black Leopard, Red Wolf is. So even if you've had a parent die and you're still dealing with it, I think that this would be more cathartic than upsetting for you. In my mind, this is a pretty weak book. If you need to have a strong ending in order to enjoy a book, this is not a good book for you. Skip it. Because this does not have a Disney ending, it doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but it also just doesn't have a nice, meaty, solid ending for me, in my taste. It also, I don't think, makes the point that it means to make. I don't think that it has fully completed the cycle that it meant to hone in on. So, there's so much that you could do to make this book better. Here's the spoilery part. I don't understand why the third part of this book had to do with Fern at all. Why do we care? Why do we care about Fern? Why do we care about Tony? Why do we care? We don't care. I don't care. I don't want to know about that. I want to know what happened with the kids. I want to know what's happening at Teeling. Instead, we have Fenno as like an old gay man who's just by himself out in the middle of nowhere, who's still friends with Tony because he's just like this magical person who can break up with people and it's fine. House sitting, like, and, okay. So we're going to have Fern. We met Fern in the first part with the dad. And then we're going to come back around and she's going to be knocked up by some other Greek guy. And it's not even the tour guide person. No, it's some other Greek guy that she's found because she almost killed her husband, or she might have killed her husband. I don't care about that storyline at all. Do not care. Was that the guide? No. No, because didn't they meet in college? Yeah, okay. No, so it didn't matter. I don't care. I don't know who this guy is, and I don't want to know. So now she's knocked up by the Greek guy, and we didn't even bring it around to say, oh, you knew my dad. I was waiting for that the whole freaking time. Ooh, I did not like that. And I don't like Tony as a character. I'm over Tony as a character. I don't like that anymore. I'm not a teenage girl. I'm not taken in by the handsome photographer guy who just gets away with everything. I'm over it. I'm over it. Unless he's going to have some sort of character development, but he doesn't. He stays stagnant. Maybe that's what I'm upset about. None of these characters learn anything. They're all just stagnant. We learn that dad doesn't know how to deal with the mom, and that mom is like this strong-willed woman who just wants to take care of dogs, and that they're fine with that, and that she might have cheated, but then he knew, and everyone just doesn't do anything. It's just this long book of nobody doing anything. Whew. It just felt dumb. It just felt like we didn't go far enough. You know, we didn't have any big crisis. We didn't learn anything. Whew. I was so confused when the third part was Fern. I was like, who is this? What is this at all? Because that part of the first part of the book, when the dad's in Greece and he meets Fern and he's like, oh, she's this young person who might be interested in me. That's kind of creepy. That's kind of creepy. And I'm not into it. Because if she had been a little bit older, then it would have been fine. But she wasn't. I don't know. It just came off as weird. And then you're like, why is this even in here? But it's in here so that we can come back to it in the third act, but then not really cycle anything out. Like, are we supposed to learn? I don't know what we're supposed to learn. And that's the problem. Whatever. Okay, next up we have Carrie by Stephen King. This is a quick 290-page read, very easy. It's considered a teen fiction book, which should have given me a better idea of how scary this was going to be, because I was ready to be scared out of my mind. I still think that the movie would be scary as hell. I don't want to see it. I'm not interested. But this book was not scary in the way that I thought it was going to be. And here's why. Here's my thought process. You know, you're familiar with all of the concepts in this book. If you were a teenage girl, you know what it's like to be a teenage girl. If you went to any public American high school, you know what it's like to be in a public American high school and how rude teenagers are. You know all the things that have to happen in this book in order for this girl to go crazy. And because this book is so rooted in real life, it's so rooted in what you already know, it's a slow burn, right? You can see it happening, you're thinking about it, you kind of know what might happen. You see the trajectory. So it's not a jump scare book. It's not crazy ridiculous, because everything is nicely set up to just ramp you up slowly and then be like, whew, man. In that way, I found it way more enjoyable than I thought that I would, because I didn't have to sit there being scared the whole time. I had the nice anticipation of things are going to happen, and then there was a good payoff. It was good. That's a good, solid book. I like it. I'm also a little bit upset at how well Stephen wrote a 16-year-old girl. I know that his wife helped him with it. I read in his memoir on writing, his book on writing, I wish he hadn't called it that, because it's so hard to talk about. His book on writing talks about how his wife, Tabby, helped him with this book. And so I understand that he got help from his wife, but still, it's not cool how correct he is in his characterization of a 16-year-old girl. I don't have any spoilers for this. I think that everybody friggin' knows. Or they don't want to know, which, true. Finally, we have Daisy Jones and the Six. I gotta say, I wish this book was different. I understand that it's cool to have an interview format, but it was very distracting for me, because I think that it must have been very difficult to write it in that way. Having to think about how all these characters would respond to pointed interview questions, whether or not they're going to tell the truth, whether or not they're going to fabricate, if they just don't remember something. I think it would have been easier to write, and it would have been more satisfying for me as a reader to read this as a narrative style, as opposed to a interview format. Also, if you find yourself on the Sunset Strip in the 70s, please, for the love of God, wear shoes. Some of these characterizations, I don't understand why we put them in there. I get that you need to make your characters different. You need to differentiate them. but not wearing shoes. Like, why? I I just, I don't get it. I don't get it, and I don't like it. This book is unenjoyable for me because of my own hangups, and I'm aware of that. So if you are somebody who enjoyed Almost Famous, if you like the Beastie Boys book that they wrote, the thick book that they wrote themselves, and it's letters and stuff, back and forth, and they've got some comic book style stuff in there. This is the girlier version of that, I feel like. Except that, of course, their stuff is real. If you like Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing style, you probably will like this. I'm assuming that she has a very specific writing style because some of the reviews for this are, I did not like her previous work and I don't like this either. Or I love everything that she's ever come out with. So I've never read any of her other stuff, but it seems like she has a pretty well-developed cult following. Okay, let's talk about my hangups and my problems with this book, which might be considered spoilers. I have a problem with women who are characterized as being otherworldly. Otherworldly in a way where they have such a strong personality that they make everyone in the room turn to them, that they just can't be controlled, that they can't do whatever. I've never met a person like that because they don't exist. And I feel like it's just an easy way for writers to characterize women, difficult women, in a positive light so that you can just write them off. You can just say, oh, well, you know, it's just Daisy. It's just Camilla. No, it's not. Daisy and Camilla are two sides of the same coin for me. Both of them are women who need to be right, who are difficult to deal with, and who have been given a free pass because the narrative demands it. I think that the payoff of this book is just not great. The fact that it's Camilla's kid who's writing it, that's the big reveal. I don't care. I don't care about that. I don't think that it changes anything. I don't think that we went far enough to let it change anything because we don't get the payoff. We get the letter that Camilla leaves to her kids saying, make sure that your dad calls Daisy. They owe me a song. Did they do it? Are we supposed to just imagine that they did or did not do it based on what was given? They didn't do it. They didn't do it. That's the conclusion that I come to, and I come to it pretty well. I think that it's a pretty easy decision to make, in my mind, that they did not get back together because they did not really like each other. And she's moved on, and he has other stuff going on, and it explains how the kid got access to these high-profile people, but it just doesn't do anything for me. Not in the way that a narrative style would have for me. Because you're dealing with people. First of all, we're supposed to believe that they wrote one album together and it was the most amazing thing ever and it revolutionized the music industry and blah, blah, blah. I understand that has to be the story, but I would so much rather hear about a band, especially a band of this size, right? This many characters, this many people who, again, have to grow and learn and work together or not work together and part their separate ways. But then, if it's going to be they have to part and go their separate ways, then I want the first quarter of the book to be like this big blow up and the aftermath of it. I don't want all this, like, ramp up so that we can break up the band and then we can see them when they're old and then what did they do? Nothing. Who knows? You find out. You decide what they did. No. Especially when you're supposed to tell me that these women are so otherworldly, are so amazing that they can get away with anything, then why haven't they gotten away with all sorts of stuff? Why didn't they go on to do all sorts of amazing things? Why didn't Daisy keep writing music? I find her to be a very unlikable character because she's so unnatural. It's so unnatural to any experience I've ever had with any women, ever, in my life. And I wish that we would stop catering to this idea that there are women like this in the world. The most realistic woman in this book is Karen. She is the star of this book. She's fantastic. I love Karen. She was sleeping with a guy that she didn't really love because she didn't really know what she was doing. She's the keyboardist in this band where all this other stuff is going on. She had to get an abortion because she wanted to be a working woman. That is an interesting story. That should have been what we talked about. Because talking about Daisy and Camilla and how they always know what's right, they always know what's happening. Oh my God, she only eats one meal a day. She's always on coke. She's always on pills. She's always doing this and that. I don't care because I'm over it. I'm an adult who has to deal with things now. And I don't want to hear about your coke addiction. I don't want to hear about how you wear bangles all the way up your arms. I don't want to hear about how beautiful and amazing you are. I want to hear about real people like Karen who have to make real decisions, who have consequences for their actions. Wow, this book made me so mad and I didn't even know it. That's it. That's all, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you read something good recently. I'm off to get these books back to the library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.